Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's talk about structuralism. Structuralism emerged during the early 20th century, especially after 1906 and 1916. Structuralism is an intellectual movement and a methodological approach that emerged mainly in the early to mid-20th century. It argues that phenomena of human culture and their cognition, language, literature, myths, social customs can only be understood by analyzing the underlying structures or systems of relationships that govern them. Rather than focusing on individual elements in isolation, structuralism studies the patterns and the rules that organize these elements into meaningful wholes. At its core, structuralism points that meaning arises not from the individual components themselves, but from their differences and positions within a system. The approach is fundamentally systematic and relational. Origins and intellectual foundations. Linguistics. Fernand de Saussure, 1857-1913. Structuralism's intellectual birth is often attributed to the Swiss linguist Fernand de Saussure, whose work Course in General Linguistics, compiled posthumously from his lectures in 1916, revolutionized linguistic theory by introducing key concepts like langue versus parole. Langue refers to the abstract systemic structure of language shared by a community. Parole is the concrete use of language in individual speech acts. Sign, signifier and signified. Language is composed of signs which are made of two parts. The signifier, that is the sound or written form, and a signified, that is the concept or meaning. Saussure emphasized that this relationship is arbitrary and a meaning depends on differences between signs within the system rather than any inherent connection. Synchronic versus diachronic. Saussure distinguished between studying language at a fixed point in time, that is synchronic analysis, versus studying its historical evolution, that is diachronic analysis. Structuralism favors synchronic methods to uncover underlying patterns. Impact. Saussure's ideas shifted the study of language from a historical focus to a structural one, inspiring scholars in multiple disciplines to look for similar underlying structures. Now let's analyze structuralism's expansion beyond linguistics. In Anthropology by Claude Lévi-Strauss, 1908 to 2009, French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss applied structuralist principles to human culture, myths, and kinship systems. His landmark works include Structural Anthropology 1958 and The Raw and the Cooked 1964, where he argued that universal mental structures shape human culture across time and geography. Binary opposition. Lévi-Strauss identified fundamental oppositions like the raw cooked nature culture, life death as the basic unit structuring myths and a social life. His work sought underlying rules of myth-making and a cultural expression, emphasizing commonalities rather than historical specifics. Literary theory and criticism. Structuralism heavily influenced literary criticism by focusing on narrative structures and chords instead of authorial intention or historical context. Key figures include Vladimir Propp, 1895 to 1970, In a Morphology of the Folktale, 1928, Vladimir Prov analyzed Russian folktales, identifying 31 narrative functions and 7 character roles as universal story elements. Roland Barthes, 1915 to 1980, in books like Mythologies, 1957, and As By Said, 1970, Barthes used the structuralism to analyze cultural myths and texts as systems of science. Zvetan Todorov, 1939 to 2017, applied a structural analysis to the genre of the fantastic in literature, exploring narrative devices and reader responses. Structuralism provided a scientific framework to analyze literature, demystifying texts by uncovering the structures that generate meaning. Other fields include psychology. Structuralism as a school, for example, Wilhelm Wundt, Edward Titchener, aimed to break down mental processes into basic elements, although this psychological structuralism differs from post-Saussurean intellectual structuralism. Philosophy. Structuralism influenced the postmodern philosophy, semiotics, and critical theory. Sociology. Structuralist approaches investigated social institutions and norms as systems. Key concepts and theoretical elements. Structure versus agency. Structuralism emphasizes the determining power of systems and structures over individual agency. Binary oppositions. Foundational pairs of opposites, example male, female, good, evil, are seen as the building blocks of meaning making. Systems and codes. Human culture operates like a language with the codes and rules governing meaning. Interdependence and difference. Elements derive meaning only through their relations and their differences from others in the structure. Synchronic analysis. Structuralism prioritizes understanding systems at a given time rather than historical changes. Social and historical context. Structuralism arose post-World War I and II during the time when scholars sought scientific methods to understand culture and society. It paralleled broader intellectual trends, emphasizing systems such as cybernetics and information theory. It was particularly prominent in France during 1950s and 70s, intersecting with a Marxist theory, psychoanalysis, and the emerging postmodernism. The post-war atmosphere of questioning traditional humanism and authorial authority made structuralism's systemic view compelling. Influence and relevance. In linguistics, established modern linguistics as a scientific discipline focusing on the structure of language. In literature, transformed literary studies through structural analysis, narratology, and semiotics. Anthropology introduced the universalist frameworks for cross-cultural analysis. Philosophy and cultural theory laid a groundwork for semiotics and critical theory. Media and cultural studies provided tools to decode media and popular culture as science systems. Now let's analyze major structuralist thinkers and their works. First of all, Ferdinand de Saussure. His work, Course in General Linguistics. He founded structural linguistics. The next person, Claude Lévi-Strauss. His work, Structural Anthropology, Mythologies. His contribution, Structural Analysis of Myths and their Kinship Systems. Next, Roland Barthes, Mythologies, S by Z, extra his works, and his contribution, Structuralist Literary Criticism and Semiotics. Next, Vladimir Traub. His works include Morphology of the Folktale, contribution, Narrative Functions in Folktales. The next person, Zvetin Todorov. His work is The Fantastic, contribution to Structural Approach to Literary Genres. The next one, Jacques Lacan. Work is Ecritis. His contribution to structuralist psychoanalysis. Now let's analyze criticism and post-structuralism. Structuralism has been criticized for its determinism and neglect of human agency, treating people as passive bearers of structure. It was challenged by post-structuralism in the 1960s and 1970s, with the thinkers like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Julia Kristeva arguing that structures are unstable, meaning is fluid, and systems are influenced by power and discourse. Legacy and continuing influence or importance of structuralism. While pure structuralism declined after the 1970s, its method and concepts remain foundational. Contemporary disciplines still use structuralist insights in narratology and literary theory, semiotics and media studies, cognitive science and anthropology, linguistic theory and discourse analysis.